Our job is to be, in my opinion, is to be a very light touch. Almost like a good coach. We're to get the best athletes in the room, create the best chemistry in the team, and then get out of their way. Just catalyze it, give them a little bit of guidance, and get out of their way. And coach them when you need to, but it's a light touch.
Welcome to Confessions of a Vistage Chair. I'm your host, Ryan Hogan. We have real, behind-the-scenes conversations with Vistage Chairs who share honest stories and practical insights on leadership growth, peer advisory groups, and what actually happens in Vistage meetings. Let's pull back the curtain. Chris, I'm super excited to have this conversation for a variety of reasons, and you'll find out. Spoiler, veteran. But thanks so much for coming on and sharing your story.
No, I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah. So that's actually where I want to start is you. I guess we don't say were a Marine because the whole Marine thing. I'm in the Navy, so there's a little bit of rivalry, but your journey or your career started in the Marine Corps.
It did, yes. I went right out of college. I went to officer candidate school 2 days after graduating from the University of Southern California. I went from having a beach blonde surfer do haircut to getting my head shaved like a Hare Krishna, wondering what the heck I was doing. But yeah, it happened pretty fast.
And was that kind of always in the cards? Like growing up, you were like, I want to be in the Marines?
It's a good question. I mean, my dad and my uncles all served in World War II. My grandfather served in World War I on both sides. So we had this history of service. My brother graduated high school in the middle of the Tet Offensive in '68. And I remember sitting around the TV as a family when they were doing the ping pong balls for the draft, by birthdays. And so he ended up not serving. And I ended up going to an all boys Catholic military boarding school outside Chicago, which is where I, got exposed to some military. I got nominations to West Point and the Naval Academy, but at the end of the day, I was ready for a co-ed experience. 17 years old, I went out to Los Angeles. I was like a Mennonite in Vegas after leaving a all-boys Catholic boarding school. It's like, oh my God, 17 years old. I'm from Chicago. I'm on the West Coast. It was probably not, I probably thinking about that decision, but it worked out ultimately.
So I enlisted at 17 years old and then spent 10 years, went through what we call the Seaman to Admiral program. I think the Marine Corps calls it MESEP.
Yep.
But spent a lot of time around and with officers and have heard the horror stories from the academy. So it's like great institution and all these other things, but it's like it's 4 years of sort of like boot camp or lack of freedom at least.
Yeah, it's hardcore. I mean, I certainly had we went through OCS, then you go to the basic school as an officer. It's like 26 weeks after you graduate from OCS, and our attrition rate in OCS was pretty high. I think we had 50 people start, and I think we graduated or commissioned maybe 23 or something like that. I mean, you had guys getting off the buses with tennis rackets. They thought they were going to like country club. And I remember the drill sergeant just zeroing in on them, like, what the hell are you thinking? It's like, but it was a very physical time. It was very hot. It was Quantico in the summer. It was very humid. We had a lot of heat stroke. And, I was a runner in college. I ran distance. So the physical part, the running part was not hard for me. It was, carrying the 80 pounds on your back and going for marches that you didn't know if it was 1 mile or 20 miles at 4 a.m. when they woke you up. It was more mentally challenging. But yeah, and basic school is when we ran into all the guys from the Naval Academy, because that's where they would funnel in. And then we, from there you go to get your MOS and you go to I was an infantry. I went to infantry officer school from there.
So, it sounds like looks like you did a bunch of interesting things over that 4 years. And like after 4 years, were you like time to see what the civilian stuff's all about?
I think so. I did 2 deployments to the Middle East, and I was a platoon commander, and then I was my second deployment. I started out and there was very short times between the deployments. We were gone. First time, I think we were gone 7 months. We were actually the 31st MEF Marine Expeditionary Force, which you hear about on the news, ironically, right now, going to the Straits of Hormuz, and that's where we went. We were off the coast of Iran after the hostage rescue and all that time off Iran and Afghanistan. And so that was the first deployment. The second one, we got back probably 5-6 months. We went again, and I was a XO, executive officer of a rifle company. And my roommate, you have 3 roommates on the ship, at least I did, and it was the S1 officer. The battalion S1 reports to the colonel, and the colonel fired him like 2 weeks out and appointed me to replace him. So I've been promoted to S1, and my roommate for the next 7 months is the guy they fired. So that was a fun experience, and but it was one of those things that just happened. He kind of looked at me, and I go, "You're looking at me? I mean, you want me to be the asshole? Are you sure?" But it was a great experience. It was a colonel, Naval Academy grad from Vietnam, very great, Colonel Fagan. He was a great leader. I got back from that deployment, and I interviewed to be an aide-de-camp for the Deputy Commanding General for Fleet Marine Force Pacific, and I got selected. And so he was a two-star, General Dennis Murphy, who played basketball at Georgetown. He was a 6'7" Marine. He's deceased now, but he was Irish like me. He picked me to be his aide, and it's the safest job in the military is to be an aide-de-camp because you'll never get fired because the general would have to admit he had bad judgment if he fired you. So I think you get to hang around even if you screw up. But it was awesome. I mean, I got to be in briefings with Caspar Weinberger, who was Secretary of Defense then, and Admiral Crow, who was Secretary of Navy, I think, or SINCPAC. He was SINCPAC, Commander in Chief Pacific. So I got to be inside the tent on a lot of interesting briefings and get to see some cool moments with the generals. And I always tell people, a lot of times Hollywood makes the generals look like a bunch of buffoons or. And these are some of the, could have been CEOs of any organization, anywhere if they wanted to, but they chose, to stay in, be selfless, stay in the military. But for me, at 4 years, it was an opportunity. I had a chance to become regular commission. They offered me a regular commission because I'd been OCS, and I went into the reserves instead. I was ready for, I was 25 years old, and I had this feeling like the world was passing me by. I was falling behind. You had this feeling like, oh, my peer group's been out there for 4 years. They're out there in business, and I'm sitting here getting my hair cut every week with a straight razor, so it was like ready for the business world. And that's when I left and, went through one of those military placement or junior military officer, conventions and had a few offers. And I went into healthcare. I figured I was on the demand creation side. I might as well go on the other side of healthcare. So, so that's what I did. I went to work for American Hospital Supply, which merged in a year with Baxter very quickly. Yeah.
Gotcha. And so what did that transition, was that transition easy for you, like coming out of the military and then going right into corporate, or was there some?
Yeah, it wasn't bad. Yeah, it's funny. I think back, it's been so long. I think it was fine. I mean, I felt very comfortable with, the leadership part of it. Because you think about it, when you have 40 Marines and you're under you as a platoon commander and you're halfway around the world for 7 months and, in hostile territory, a lot of bad things can happen. Then you get into business and you've got people that report to you as sales reps or, in different functional roles. And what's the worst thing that can happen? They miss a number, their expense report gets lost, maybe they have a car wreck, nobody's going to die. Nobody's going to, so for me, it was like the stakes were different. I mean, the leadership, I think, translated in terms of the lessons I learned. I think they've stuck with me forever. And I think, people in the Marine Corps, you get respect for your rank, but I don't think people follow you for your rank. They follow you because they trust you. They trust that you're competent, and they trust that you care about them, that you're not using them like, pawns for whatever, ambition you have. And I think that's true in the civilian world. People look at their leaders and say, hey, is this person competent? Are they going to, teach me? Are they going to be good at what they do? Can I trust them? And do they care about me? Or are they just using me as a means to an end? And I think the troops, Marines figure that out pretty fast, based on how you interact with them, whether they're going to follow you or not. So that's what I took with me from that. So I think that part translated to leadership. I had to learn a lot about business, itself, but that part was, I thought was very helpful to me. It was probably a leadership MBA, and I didn't appreciate it at the time.
I 100% agree with you there. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of things that I've learned throughout the military that took a lot of both time and retrospection to understand what that journey was or what I learned from it. When you talk about some of the things that have translated from a leadership standpoint into business, you brought up this word like empathy and it's very top of mind, and people are talking about empathy a lot. What is empathy to you, and how does showing that you actually care and that the people aren't a means to the end, how does that show up in business?
Yeah, I think, empathy is different than sympathy. Sympathy is, oh, that's too bad. It's so bad for you. Empathy to me is really, really connecting with where the person is and really being present and connecting with what they're feeling. not being dismissive, and just saying, hey, I get it. I can't change it all the time, but I can recognize it and take that into account, and make people feel heard. I think that's, and it wasn't like, I don't think we had a course on empathy in the Marine Corps. If they did, I might have through that one. But I think at the end of the day, that's why people connect with you as a leader. Because they do know that you see them, you connect with what they're struggling with, you see them as a human being, not a human doing, and I think I think that's important. And so for me, that's what it means. It's really connecting with somebody and making sure, I can't always change the circumstance, but I can contemplate it, recognize it, acknowledge it, and then help people navigate whatever they're navigating to the degree possible. But yeah, it's I think that's what I took away. We had so much diversity in the Marine Corps. Back in those days, we had guys in our platoons who their choice was, you're going to go to jail or the Marine Corps. I mean, that was real. We had guys from, inner city. You had kids from the, South, kids from, the Bible Belt. You had kids from New York. It was a melting pot. And it was, and we figured it out because I think the one thing everybody cared about when you went deployment was, are you good at what you do, and you're going to take care of me? You're going to have my back. They didn't care about where you went to school, what your grade point average was, where you grew up, how much money your parents had. They really kind of distills it down to the basics. Like, hey, are you going to keep me alive? Are you going to take care of me? Can I count on you, to cover me if I need you to cover me? Or can I count on you to be where you're supposed to be, when we're doing what we're doing? And I think that's the basics of it, right? If I can count on you, I don't really, the rest of it, I don't care about your politics or about where you came from. We always say everyone's kind of green Marine, everyone's, that's what we were, right? It was like, always sounds cultish when I talk to people about the Marine Corps, but, I think they do a really good job of telling stories and doing all the things you do in branding and corporations talk about in terms of culture. And, kind of like when I got exposed, I didn't appreciate it at the time. I was probably sucked in by it, and didn't realize it, but it does have a certain selection bias. It attracts people that kind of like, embrace the suck. It's like, oh, this is bad, this is really going to be ugly. Oh, let me do that sounds like fun, let's try that. It's kind of an interesting group.
100%. And like, agree with you on like the branding of the Marine Corps and the whole attract or repel. Like, you either gravitate towards that or you're like, I'm gonna go join the Air Force, and the Marines don't want people that want to be in the Air Force. So that's a whole thing. And like, one of those retrospection, there's been a lot of different things throughout my career where I've been like, oh, like, the Navy actually got it right there. So one of those things, I just had a debate with a guy yesterday about how many core values a company needs. And like, my first company that I launched, which unfortunately bankrupted, but we had like 12 core values. Like, I couldn't, and they were all like sentences, not words. And, I was like, well, I'm smarter than Navy, honor, courage, commitment. And like, that's ingrained in me and I can define it and all these different things. But I was like, no, that's too simple. But it's actually like, there's been a lot of time and trial and error to get to that level of simplicity. And it's, to me, it's hard to get to that level of simplicity. But once you do, like, it just makes everything crystal clear.
Absolutely. We had an acronym in the Marines. You might have had it in the Navy too. It's KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. That was kind of for everything. It's like, don't overcomplicate it, right? I mean, you get these orders that come down from the Pentagon all the way through the chain, and some private first class has a equivalent degree, maybe not. He's got to be able to understand what the mission is. You're not trying to impress them with big words. You're trying to make sure they understand their role in the mission, and the role of they play as a rifleman. All the way through to, squad leaders and fire team leaders, et cetera. So yeah, I think the military does some things very well that translate, and it allows them to be agile, which is what corporations lose as they get bigger often, is agility. The ability to, have decisions made, even though the colonel's not on the battlefield, or there's in a helicopter, or they're back on ship. You can still make advances because you've got lieutenants who understand, and staff sergeants who understand the mission and understand the limits of advance, and where do we stop, and what happens if this doesn't go right, because nothing goes right. Typically, everything, by the time that you land on the beach or they put you in a landing zone, everything's different. Well, that didn't look the same. That's not what we planned for. You can't say, hey, time out, mulligan, let's go back. Oh, sorry, it's like, so you learn how to adapt, and you learn that, hey, okay, we know that the general mission is, or our mission is to do X, and we got to iterate, we got to figure it out. And I figured it's kind of, when I look back at my career in business, the things that energized me were the chaotic assignments I had. And I think part of it was, I was drawn to the infantry and the Marines because, you have to make clarity out of chaos. You have to help people, get confident when there's not a reason to be confident. You have to, create clarity around confusion. Like, things didn't go and people panic, and you got to go, okay, let's, you got to be maybe often wrong, but never in doubt. But you have to be, you have to have some certitude that, hey, this is what we're going to do. Here's what we're doing. Here's how we're going to rally. Here's how we're going to do something, iterate. And I think some of that is important in business often too, and the Marine Corps is big, and they drill hours and hours of leadership, into us as officers. And I think I didn't appreciate that either. A lot of companies won't spend money on their leaders. They don't invest in them until they get to a certain level. And I think, leadership's a behavior. It's not a job role, so everybody's got the potential to be a leader. And that's why I think it's a verb. Right? So leadership is not like, oh, you're a leader when you become a captain. You're a leader when you become a director. You're a leader all the time, and that's how you find who should be promoted, is they're exhibiting those behaviors before they have the role, the bars on, or before they have the title. They're already exhibiting that, that behavior.
What are some of those behaviors that like you look for that are kind of key when you're like, is this person ready for this next level?
Yeah, I think problem solving, taking the initiative are really important. I think too many people, get stuck quickly. And I think that, even if they're wrong, keep moving, fall forward, don't fall backwards, kind of. Let's fall and keep moving. So I think, taking the initiative, problem solving, I think curiosity, obviously, being open to unintended feedback or consequence, things you didn't expect, and being able to incorporate that into your thinking. Not being so rigid, like, okay, I can't listen because I've got my blinders on. I've got a plan. I think part of the leadership journey is being open to new information and processing it, and then, be wrong early. Yeah. We have a saying in one of my business groups: you can be wrong, but don't be wrong long. So it's like, kind of our job in Vistage with each other is to call each other out when they're wrong and say, hey, I think you're wrong, and here's why. So to kind of be open to that and embrace that as part of the being a leader, not as like, oh, I'm not perfect, so that calls attention to my my shortcomings or something. Heck, most of the generals and leaders I've had that were really outstanding were very, humble and self-effacing and self-deprecating. They didn't have that kind of arrogance of like, well, I'm right. Now there are people like that in the military and the civilian world, but the ones I emulate or try to emulate were not that way.
I just had this conversation with my captain last week, and he's coming on the podcast in a few weeks, and we were kind of debriefing like how he saw leadership and things like that. And he talked about this, like, he's like, once someone starts screaming, like, I've lost all respect. And it's so interesting because like with the movie show, and maybe this was, maybe this was kind of back in the day. Well, maybe I probably stumbled into a few screamers, but I'll say like there are a few and far between at this point in the military. I think it's evolved to the degree. Like, what's your perspective on that? Because there's some people where it's like they're screamers and stuff gets done, but what's your philosophy?
I think if you have to yell, you probably have lost self-control. I think people want their leaders to have a modicum of self-control. Like you lose it. How do you expect everyone else to not lose it? I think you have to be able to, I think actually if you kind of are quieter with your challenge, people lean in more to listen. It's almost like the counterintuitive, like you have more impact. I think people tune out noise, or they get reflexive, they get defensive. When people are hunkered down or defensive, I don't think they listen well. And I think it doesn't reflect well if you have to turn up the volume. To me, it's kind of, I don't know. It's not very sophisticated, or anybody can yell. A clanging bell, it's like, who cares? It doesn't do much for me. It's a lack of self-control. And I respect self-control in people too, even when it hurts somebody or they're really holding it in. I respect people who go, hey, you didn't go off. You could have. And you could have had every excuse in the world to, to fight back or to yell back or go off. But self-control is important because people watch leaders. I think people watch more what they do than what they say, than listen to what they say. Behaviors. It's like I said, it's a verb. So they're watching your behaviors all the time. And that's true as an officer. You know that. I mean, we were taught to eat last. When we had food and we're starving and we get some hot food. Officers ate last. We didn't go to the front of the line. And we hoped that our Marines respected us enough to leave food for us. Because if they didn't respect you, by the time you went through the line, there was nothing. I mean, they would have been heaping it on or dumping it. That happens. If they don't respect you, there's going to be no food by the time you go through the line. If they respect you, they make sure, hey, lieutenants are back there. Let's make sure we don't, take all the food. But that's just, this kind of lead from the back in some cases. It's not always the yelling and the screaming.
That's, when I think about, and I realize that this is tradition and I realize it's just kind of a part of the Navy. But one thing that I've really struggled with, especially when I was on ships, I'm not on ships too often anymore. But on ships, there's something called the ward room. For some reason, it gets confused externally as the war room. No, it's called the ward room, and on ships, and it's where officers go to eat. And it's always kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Like, we sit around a table, whoever's the highest ranking, we ask permission to. You were on amphib, so like you know this.
It was crazy. It's like a country club. I felt, and then we had servants. We had certain chiefs. You had chiefs that were serving you dinner and like taking your plate away. I felt like, what am I at a country club? I mean, what is this? Finishing school? It's like it was not. We were just looking. It was surreal to us. We would, the Marines. We'd be in the ward room when they weren't serving meals. We'd get a movie projector, and if it was on, I was on an LST, which had no keel. Back in the day, the LST 1185, the USS Schenectady was my first ship, and we got in that typhoon in the South China Sea on our way to the Indian Ocean. I'm not kidding you. And we had no keel. So, I mean, it was like the Poseidon adventure. I mean, we were doing these big rolls. And of course, being Marines, what did we do? We went in the wardroom and set up a projector and tied it down with rope, so we could watch movies. And we're in there watching the movies back and forth. Because we couldn't add any value to the Navy. The guys are all at their, stations. We couldn't add any value. We're not going to lay in. So we tied down the movie projector in those days with the 8mm or 16mm or whatever it was, and watching movies, rocking back and forth 40 degrees, trying not to get sick. But yeah, the wardroom was a whole different, experience. It was anathema to kind of the Marine Corps, it was different.
Do you speak like, you like light up with this conversation when we're talking about this? Like, did you ever throughout your business career or like look back and be like, maybe I should have stayed in?
Yeah, sometimes, as I get older, I had my 50th high school reunion this year. And, and as I get older, I think you always think differently, reflect more on your life, right? You reflect more on the things in your life that were highlights and learning. And yeah, so there were times, I had some buddies who stayed in. My college roommate stayed in from Southern Cal. He went the pilot route. He flew F4s. And he retired as a 3-star general, which is kind of funny. I always wanted to send pictures from college to the boarding. Hey, this guy's a general? What? Wait a minute. Let me tell you some stories. But he's a great guy. He was a F4 pilot on the Midway, and I went to a chair world once, and we were in San Diego, and I took a picture of the Midway because it's now a museum, and we had like an event there. And I said, how freaking old are we now that your first duty station's a museum? People are paying like to go up there and see where you flew F4s, and some of my friends stayed in and they enjoyed it. And I don't know, for me, I think it happened to me in corporate too. Like, I left corporate when I was 40. I was president of a public biotech at 38, and I got to my 40th birthday and I was just chafing, and my wife, Anna, who's a co-chair with me in our practice, and she said, let's just face it, you're unemployable. You have to be an entrepreneur. You are the worst employee ever. You chafe it. You're all authority. Kind of everything. You're like a contrarian. You have to push against everything. And I didn't think that was true in the Marine Corps. But I guess we had a lot of degrees of freedom, more than people probably think. When you're out in the field, you get a lot of decision making authority, right? You get to make decisions and within some guard bands, right? But you had the ability to, we're not autonomous. Like, oh my God, robots. What do we do? So. Yeah, so it's interesting. But yeah, I did the times look back, and when my guys were retiring, like the guys who I were classmates with retired, and you always go, man, that's crazy. They said 30 years, they were in, a lot of them got out, and A few made general, a few of my classmates. A lot of them died, in helicopter crashes. And, we had Beirut in '83. I lost my bunkmate in the terrorist attack in Beirut. He had an 18-month-old daughter. So, there's a lot of those kinds of, during that time, when I got out, I was very much unhappy with the way the Marines were being deployed in Beirut. The way we were, in an open, we're in this hotel in the middle of an airport, near an airport, no defilade, no cover, weapons couldn't be loaded, political, all these rules, and basically set up to be vulnerable, and it's like, that kind of, we're not a peacekeeping force either. That's another one, kind of like right seat, right role, or right person, right seat. Marine Corps is peacekeeping. I mean, you wouldn't make us crossing guards at elementary schools either. I mean, that's not peacekeeper and Marine. It's kind of like, what's an oxymoron? Jumbo shrimp, military intelligence, peacekeeper, Marine. That's not what we're trained for. I mean, come on. It's like, that was a ridiculous waste of life, and it was because politicians, used the Marines, in my opinion, in a way that was frustrating. And I saw so many of my friends die, and I was a general's aide. I was just, in that tour right after that. And I just said, I gotta go. I mean, I didn't feel good about being a pawn like that, or the way I felt about it. So
we were talking a little bit about the brand and like attract and repel and things like that. And you're absolutely right. Like when you talk about your personality profile, I think, the military, gigantic organizations, a lot of bureaucracy. And what was interesting, I went through the War College program about a year ago. It was a 10-month program in Newport, Rhode Island. And I went through and did all of these assessments. So like the Hogan assessment and like you name it, like we were taking those assessments. And I was different than everybody. And that wasn't like different as in necessarily like a positive thing. What they told me during the debrief is that my personality profile usually does not stay in the military. And it's for the same exact reasons that it sounds like, autonomy at probably a much larger scale, and stop telling me what to do because I know what I'm doing, those types of things.
Right.
So
yeah. Well, the beauty of deployment and the beauty of conflict is a lot of the bureaucrats hide. They don't want to be anywhere near it. They want to come out when everything's safe. So what I liked was like I said, the confusion, the chaos, that kind of lit me up. I got excited by that. And when I looked at my career in business, I was always drawn to, there's a business unit they're standing up over there. Oh, you go over there and it fails, your career's going to be ruined. Like, oh, really? That sounds cool. Let me do that. Let me move to Miami and do that. Right. So I did. Those are the kinds of things I did when I reverse engineered my life. I always said, that looks like that could be a stupid move, or that's really risky. I'll do that. I mean, I got an endorphin rush from it, or maybe that was, my self-medicating ADHD before I was diagnosed. Right. It's like, oh yeah, I gotta have something to, focus me. But
have you like settled down since? Are you like reflection and a lot of inner work, or are you like, no, if I want to move, like we're moving
you'd have to get Anna on here for truth serum, my wife and co-chair. She'd probably say, yeah, that's a work in process, probably. I made plenty of mistakes. I still make them. And the best thing is I make them our kids work in one of our businesses. Kids, they're 29, 28, two boys. And with Anna, we had our quarterly today. We run on EOS, so we had our quarterly. It's self-implemented now, but we had conversations about some of the mistakes in Q last year, and I was the headliner on a few of those, so it was kind of nice to kind of be with your kids. Hey, here's where I messed up. These are the things that I wish I could undo. These are the things that hopefully you learn from. It's like issue processing, right? Sometimes you learn more from somebody else's issue than your own. You're like taking notes over there, going, "Oh man, there's 3 things I better go look at." Because somebody else is, sharing and what they're struggling with, and you go, "Well, that's me. Some of that's me." So we're trying to create that with our sons in the business as we age out of our business. We, hopefully they step up. Not the Vistage side, but the other business, and if they want to do that, and they seem to. So it's it's kind of I'm at that season of my life where I want to pour into them. I want to kind of like they're a Vistage member. I want to mentor them and coach them, and hopefully be a role model in some ways. Good in some ways when I make mistakes, own it and say, hey, here's where I messed up. And I'm not sure I could have done that early in my career. I was probably less secure, when I came out of the Marine Corps initially, because I felt like I was behind. And corporate is different. There's some meritocracy to it to a certain point. When I was in sales, I love sales because it was all eat what you kill, and it was pretty hard. It was pretty hard to hide. And then when you get into the corporate world and you move up into the executive ranks, competency matters, but so do other factors, like politics and, things that, don't exactly interest me, but are important. And, I'm not naive. I mean, you gotta play that game, or you gotta be aware of it. And, I got to a point where I didn't have any stomach for it. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to look at my kids someday and go, yeah, it's okay. As long as you make $5 million, you can be a spineless, person and just roll over when somebody does something wrong, because you're going to make a lot of money if you do that. I didn't want to be that father or have that conversation. I'd rather say, no, when it's not right and it's against your values, or it chafes against who you are, you walk away, or you find another place to work.
All right, quick break, friends. Do you find it impossible to hire and retain top sales talent? Or worse, are you paying insane recruiter fees who are all using outdated hiring processes? Yeah, I was too. At Hunt to Killer, we were spending hundreds of thousands on recruiter agency fees. And after I sold that company in 2025, I started Talent Harbor. And the whole vision here was to make sales recruiting accessible to small and medium-sized businesses, because the organizations that can hire and retain world-class people are the ones that ultimately win. Most organizations rely on things like ZipRecruiter or LinkedIn, and they get hundreds, if not thousands, of resumes. But we find that the best salespeople are already perfectly placed somewhere else. And that's why our approach is to go after them. And we do that through a business model called recruiting as a service. We do not charge commissions. We do not have success fees. We don't have contracts. We don't have long-term engagements. And we become an extension of your team as expert sales recruiters. If you're tired of the same old recruiters and want to actually grow your sales team, check us out at talentharbor.com. That's Talent Harbor, TALENTHARBOR.com. Let's get your next sales superstar hired. Is that something that you had to work on? Because you talked about like this humility that you may or may not have had when you came out of the military. And is this something that you intentionally worked on? Did it just happen by accident?
I think it happened through, life, the personal and professional things we went through, and we had difficulty having children. We had, Anna and I got married to Anna late. I had a marriage that didn't last, I'll say, through the Marine Corps, made it through the Marine Corps, but, it was a college sweetheart, and it didn't last. And I got divorced, and I moved to Miami, and I met Anna. I was in a place where I didn't want to be married. Of course, that's when you get to meet somebody who you should marry when you don't want to, and so, but she's helped me, and we've been through a lot together, personally and professionally. And so it's always, when you have a good partner, it helps you reflect, and that's so funny, because I started in Vistage, and honestly, I think Anna probably should have started, because she's much more wired as a coach and reflective and curious. And it took me longer to get there, I think, in some ways. But she helped me a lot. Having a partner like that in business, and not everyone can partner with their wife, outside of the home in business like we do. So she's helped an immense amount for me to keep me honest. And she calls me on stuff like when she told me I was unemployable at age 40. I thought that was a pretty good message. I can understand that. Unemployable, that means you better go figure something out if you, because I'm tired of hearing you complain about your bosses. It's like,
and would it, was that a, not defining, but did that change the entire trajectory at that point?
100%. I was on a mission to be a CEO, and I had big jobs I was at Bayer, a $1 billion division of Bayer. I was the chief marketing officer at like 34 years old. And I, global. I had traveled all over the world. I had a big job, a lot of responsibilities, and I was blinded and just going hard, right? Then I got this offer to this public biotech company, and I took it. Be a president, corporate officer at 38. Which back then was, it was young. I mean, it's more common now for young people, but then it was like a public company. Everyone wanted to be in a public company. Now nobody does. It's kind of the world's changed, right? But, and so it put me in a place where I got to the mountaintop, or got, to there. And I said, is this what this involves? Is this what this entails? I don't want this. I spent more time talking to shareholders than I did employees. I spent more time going to, convention or conferences to talk about our stock, or do shareholder calls or things like that. And I go, that's not what I like. I don't want to appease investors. I want to, I want to do strategy. I want to work with employees. And the more I elevated in my role, the less I did that. And that didn't interest me. I understand. I guess I didn't realize that was a big part of the job. I was naive or just didn't pay attention. But when I got there, I didn't enjoy it. It's like, I don't want to have lobster dinners with a bunch of analysts that the last thing they managed was a keg at the fraternity house before they got an MBA at Harvard. They haven't managed anything. They're challenging me on, oh, what are you doing there? What's that idea? What do you mean? You just stopped riding with a kickstand, and now you're challenging me on, business strategy. I mean, I know you're smart, but have you ever done anything? I mean, come on. It's like,
that resonates so deeply. Like when people are sitting in certain positions, but they haven't operated anything in their life, but yet they're throwing around like advice or direction or guidance as if like they have operated, and you're like, what are you doing?
I'm sorry. Yeah, that's what you sign up for, right? Because you've got analysts and you've got all these people incredibly smart, but have zero, operator experience or zero people, experience. They've got all the theory, but none of the practice. It's like being a professor. It's like, okay, so.
One thing I just wanted to comment on real quick, and then get into like what you did after this. But you made this. You were talking about like life experiences and talking about like solving issues in a group environment. And one of the things I just wanted to key in on there is some of the best lessons I've learned was not me actually processing an issue, but someone else and me just being in the room. And that's like, Vistage was a life changer for me. My first company bankrupted, second company got some scale, and I was like, not going to make that mistake again. So joined Vistage, and like it gave me a group and a community of people that were solving similar issues to me. So just a little bit.
Awesome. You were blessed. I mean, I didn't know what Vistage was. I could have used it because, there aren't many places you can go and stress test your thinking and get honest feedback. You get feedback that's colored by whatever that person wants from you. They have a dog in the fight. They're not unbiased, and I think that's really powerful. It's I always tell prospects about Vistage, and I remind our members. I said, this is the one day of the month where everyone in this room wants something for you, not from you. And that's rare. You go your whole life as an owner. Everybody's got an angle. Everyone, you're kind of filtering, right? Like, okay, what's your angle? And you go into that room, and the only angle is they want you to be better. They want you to be the best version of yourself for your company and your family, and that is very rare. And I think that is what is the intellectual property of it. Issue processing is a tool for sure, and I think that environment that I just described allows that tool to be deployed in the most effective way, because people use it with that spirit of, okay, I'm not doing you any favors by not asking you the tough question that I have in my head. And I've got to learn to ask the question and ask for grace that, hey, this isn't fully formed, but I want to share what I'm seeing, and being good at that and practicing there. And, Anna and I, we don't call our Vistage, we don't call them meetings. The last thing these guys need and gals need is another meeting in their life. We call them learning laboratories. And the whole idea of a learning lab, and I got that from Wally Schmader, who's a peer of mine, a chair up in Norfolk, Virginia, is a great chair. And I like that, and we brought that back because it invites them, a learning lab invites them to try things. It invites them to stress test things. It invites them to play with, ideas. And where else are you going to do that the other 29 days of the month? Probably not. So you have to create that where they can't imagine missing it, because like, hey, that's my learning lab. That's my chance to go in there and stress test this thing I'm cogitating on, or, I'm pondering, and so, yeah, it's very powerful. And I'd never been in a group. I didn't know what Vistage was, so I came to it late in life. I wish I'd have had it. It probably would have helped me. I don't know if I'd still be unemployable, according to Anna, but I would have had more tools earlier, maybe. But it's very hard to describe to somebody. So I always try to find ways to describe it to people who haven't experienced it, because it's very experiential. Oh yeah, I'm in an industry trade group. Oh yeah, you guys, I'm sure you get real vulnerable there. Industry trade group, and they have those have a place, but it's not the same. It's not the same. So yeah, it's a blessing, and I think the thing with being a chair for me, always to remind myself, I need to be interested, not interesting. It's not about me. I'm the guide on the side, not the sage on the stage. This is not me to pontificate, like, gather around everyone, let me tell you stories about my leadership journey. It's our job is to be, in my opinion, is to be a very light touch, almost like a good coach. We're get the best athletes in the room, create the best chemistry in the team, and then get out of their way. Just catalyze it, give them a little bit of guidance, and get out of their way, and coach them when you need to. But it's a light touch. You know, I think that's what works for Ann and I. We try to be that way, but the members do the work. I mean, you create that chemistry. They want to do that work because they realize it's so rare, and it's the one chance they get to do it. In that month.
This is just an observation or sidebar. Your zingers are like, and it's just like you just have these sayings that you're like coming out with. I'm like, that's impressive how quick these things keep coming to you.
Well, it's a Marine thing, I've got to keep it simple so I can understand it, right? It's like they had the fire on on the base at the Marine Corps Library, and all the coloring books were burned, So it's like, I'm teasing. Obviously, for me, it helps me understand things. It helps me articulate it, because so much of what we have to do in Vistage is talk to people when they're prospects, or maybe just considering it, is articulate what it is in a way that they can resonates with them. And I think words are important, and figuring out the way to capture that experience without them actually going to a session, right? Without them getting like, oh. I always tell the new chairs, when you talk to a prospect, and I do this, I reverse engineer the call. And I say, how do I want them to feel? What do I want them to think when they hang up? And I say to myself, when I talk to them, I want them to hang up and say to themselves and think like, that was a very uncomfortable call, but in a most useful way. Like, that was uncomfortable in a very useful way. I haven't heard that. I haven't felt that way before. That is different. That's how I want them to feel. Not like, oh, what keeps you up at night? It's like, where did you get that? What chatbot gave you those questions? I want to make sure they're coachable, and I want to make sure when they hang up, they go, man, I don't know what that was. That made me uncomfortable, but I probably need more of that.
So before you became a Vistage Chair, like, it sounds like you had this pivot. We'll call it like a midlife pivot instead of a midlife crisis. But it was somewhere right around 40 years old, and you were like, this actually wasn't you at all. It was your wife, and she was like, this ain't for you. So what did you go do?
Well, I went to a consulting practice out of Greenwich, Connecticut, and they were the founder was a professor at Columbia Business School, and we actually went around the country because I had the marketing background from Bear. We actually went around the country working for clients and did work. We did workshops at Columbia, and that was kind of like a business development funnel to get engagements with companies, like open enrollment marketing strategy session, 5 days. We would teach it, and then people would come up to you and go, oh boy, I work at Novo Nordisk, or I work at some big company. We really need this. And so we would develop it custom for them. Back in the day before e-learning, right? This is the day when you had flip charts and you did everything. Yeah, you went to the biggest nightmare was if your slide carousel got out of order and fell. It's like, oh no, it's like back in those days, right? So we would do the stand up and teach workshops. 5 days of delivering workshop on marketing strategy, pricing, different topics, and over time, I did that for I think 5 years, and the founding partner died of cancer. And the rest of us got together and decided what we wanted to do. And I had a heavy practitioner background, so I wanted to do more than just teach, right? So I wanted to actually be in a place where you could actually see the outcome, right? Because when you teach, people leave, they get, you get the golf clap, that's a 5 out of 5, really amusing. Edutainment, we call it edutainment. I was educated but entertained. And I wanted to do a little bit more. So I branched out after 5 years after he died and did my own thing with Anna. We started a business, and we had clients like Hewlett Packard. Yeah, and did that to start that in 2004. So it's been 22 years. I had to take my shoes off in my hands. It's 22 years. 22 years we started that business, and we did that for a while. I built some e-learning modules. I built 8 e-learning modules on marketing, because once I said, I don't want my W-2 to be indexed to my status on American Airlines. It was a one-to-one relationship. I was flying all the time. I was hitting, executive platinum in May, 100,000 miles in May. I'm like, this is no life. And Anna's like a single mother with 2 young children. Our boys are 13 months apart, Irish twins. So we're thinking, hey, this is not the way I want to do this. I want to be a part of their life. So I took all my knowledge and I built it into an e-learning format. course, 8 courses, and I licensed it to companies like Microsoft and Xerox and DuPont because I wanted to make money when I wasn't traveling. I wanted to have a way to take this content, and then you could kind of level set the knowledge that you used to do in a workshop. You could level set self-paced and have assessments built in. Then when you came to work with them, you didn't have to level set. You could focus on application because everyone in the room, everyone had the basics. Oh yeah, I went through the course. I did the assessments. I understand the different types of pricing. Value-based, market-based, cost, whatever it was. And in the old days, you'd have to level set everyone real time. And that's an expensive way to get people level set, right? Get everyone up to the same. So e-learning we used it that way. And I would get licensed to these companies, and then I would do workshops on application focus. And that really was less travel then and generate some passive income, right? And then, yeah, so that was a period of time where I focused on that, until you kicked in, and then I forget what
I did. Oh, well, what was did you sell these companies? Did you wind them down? Like, what did that look like?
It's a great question. If I'd have been in Vistage Group, I probably would have sold them and I'd be on the circuit talking about how you monetize intellectual property. But, what really happened was I didn't invent, it was HTML technology, a Flash. And all of a sudden it went to, I forget what the next gen technology was. And it, took a big capital investment to change everything over. And I kind of rode the horse into the ground, and started transitioning into different kinds of work. And I built the next thing I did is there was a doctor at Oregon, Dr. Roger Best, University of Oregon. And he used to work at GE. He was an engineer. And I met him, and he had a marketing assessment that measured marketing, called marketing excellence. He sold it to the corporate executive board eventually. But I used to work with him, and we would sell that to companies because basically it was like measures your marketing organization's blood work. Like, okay, where are you guys on these different dimensions of understanding knowledge on different topics and things like that? And so when he sold it to corporate executive board, I didn't have a product anymore because they didn't see me as useful. So I built my own version of it and kind of made a 2.0 version. And then it was cloud-based. And it was called the Marketing Readiness Diagnostic. And that was really much more tailored, and it measured behaviors, or what we call practices, observable practice, as well as knowledge. Because, you can have a lot of knowledge, but not practice. And so we kind of elevated by adding behaviors, observable behaviors on 4 levels of practice competency, mastery, highest level, all the way down to basic. So we could start to build a language in companies around, okay, here's what the level based on the strategy you have, this is the kind of readiness you need to have, right? You need to have more on this service marketing than on product, or whatever the elements were. Because a lot of times people were just, we got this great strategy, but we got a generic marketing organization. We don't know where our strengths are. We got this great strategy that's very different than what we're moving to service. And now we've always been product, and that's very different. So we need different muscles. And so what we would do is we do the blood work, the marketing blood work, the diagnostic, and then say, here are your gaps. These are your gaps. And sometimes we would license the e-learning if they had foundational gaps. Our biggest clients were DuPont, Sherwin-Williams, Dell. I mean, it was amazing. Wow. It was kind of scary at times. It's like, we had some really big brands, and it was really cool work. But it was like, I felt like I was a fishing boat out in the Atlantic, all these aircraft carriers around me with these big, corporations, because you get subsumed pretty quickly when they go, yeah, we need, 5,000 of those. You're like, oh yeah, we could do that. Oh, geez, how are we going to do that? The moment when you're in a small company, it's hard to say no. But yeah, so we did that. And the marketing readiness diagnostic, that was phase 2 after the e-learning. That was kind of the next focus.
And did you like, one thing that I didn't even realize this, I'm very new into the business service space. So like I went from a zombie infested 5K obstacle course race to a murder mystery company, and then took a little bit of time off. And then I don't know if you know Tom Leonard or not, Vistage Chair out of, he was my chair in Seattle. And he came to me, and I was going through the sale process with Hunt to Killer, and he was like, hey, go look at, he was like, hey, you're not going to sit still. Like, you don't know how to. So go look at your P&L now, pick your favorite line item, go do that for a while. For me, it was people, but we spent $1 million on recruiting. I was like, what a stupid industry. Let's do something about that. So that's like the roundabout story of how I got here. But it's only been doing kind of the whole business service thing for a couple of years. One of the things that I've picked up on, it sounds like you already have this locked down, is like assessments is almost like a top of funnel tool, like an assessment to like okay, well, we ran our diagnostic and like now here's all the services or all the ways. Is that, is
Yeah,
that,
I think what happens is, to me, I use the analogy. It's like going to the doctor and saying you have a headache, and then they say, "Well, oh, great, we've got an OR available this afternoon. Let's do brain surgery." Whoa, time out! Aren't you going to do some blood work? And metaphorically, we go in there, we ask a few questions. Oh, we got a solution for you. It's brain surgery. And they go, well, what about the blood work? What about the scan? It's like so. I've always explained it that way. It's like it's almost malpractice, right? Who in the world would say, oh, I got a headache, let's get you into the OR, so let's do the diagnostic. To me, kind of creates the felt need. It creates the gap. It articulates the gap for people. It's like, yeah, we felt we were misaligned. Well, now we're giving voice to it. Because it's not just that you're misaligned. Here's the magnitude, the nature and the magnitude of that gap, right? You could be a little gap or it could be a chasm. And that's important to understand. And then if you don't have a diagnostic, you're guessing. And so, and not everybody has to have that same, capability. Maybe your people over in this region or that business unit have a different go-to-market strategy. So they need to have a different chemistry or blood work outcome than these people over here. Because you kind of treat it like it's a homogeneous, thing. Like, oh, it's all the same. It's not. Marketing is heterogeneous. And it's very much, regions are different. Countries can be different if it's global. Product life cycle stages are different, or service life cycles. That's all part of the mix. You got a lot of factors to filter in there to say, okay, if we're in a mature market, maybe that's different than what we need in an early market. In terms of the muscles, we're not running a marathon, we're running a sprint, so we need more fast twitch fiber. And so I was just trying to bring some science to it and some, specificity to it, right? So then you couldn't just like, oh, you need a generic solution. No, you don't need this. You need more of this and less of that. That's not what be very kind of, and I didn't always want to be associated with the solution either. Because the worst thing is you ask a surgeon what do you need, they're going to say surgery, It's like, so I didn't want to be the guy like, oh, I'm asking the question because I got the product right behind my back. Just say anything, I'm going to pull the product out, And that's kind of what companies do, right? Oh yeah, I'm listening. Okay, you're done speaking. Now here's the solution. It's like, oh, did you hear anything I said? So I wanted to have an arm's length, and that's why I got out of the product business in terms of the e-learning. That that's the story I tell myself, anyways. I didn't invest to keep it fresh, but it also made me agnostic to the solution. Like, hey, I'm just doing the blood work. I'm not, you decide, who the best surgeon is. Now they could ask me like, who do you recommend? I go, oh, these are the best people for pricing. These are the folks I would talk to. And that felt good too, because then I didn't have to be in the delivery side, which it's time consuming. My kids are getting older. And once again, I was trying not to travel. But yeah, that was my, leveraging the cloud, in those days, kind of putting it up in the cloud. And, that kind of took my practitioner experience and some of my teaching experience in terms of, combining those two into some kind of call to action. That, the other part of, change management is a big part of learning, right? What's the readiness to learn? Like, what's the felt need? We called it the felt need of your people. Like, they may have a low felt need. They may be unconsciously incompetent. That's a problem. You need to know that going in. Now, if they're consciously incompetent, that's much better, because then they know they have a problem, or unconsciously competent is where we're going for, but, if you have a whole organization that the leadership thinks, oh, we're excited, we got to do all this, and the people have got their arms crossed going, yeah, we're going to hunker down. This too will pass. We don't need this crap, You need to be able to diagnose that. So we had an aspect of that in the assessment too. What's their felt need? In a safe way, we could ask it and kind of show them like, hey, you got people that are pretty comfortable with the way it is, and you're trying to come in here and tell them they need to change. There's a change management challenge here. It's not just, don't spend money on development until you get to that issue. Deal with that.
And then what, did you sell this one?
No, I'm the world's worst entrepreneur. It's like no, I sold it. I think I sold it to the Goodwill, or I forget what happened to it. It might have it's my attic. I don't know what. It's funny. It's just like once again. I mean, if I'd have been in the peer group, people would have gone, "Are you freaking stupid? I mean, why don't you get an investor? Why don't you, do this to protect it? I mean, oh, yeah, I'm like exhibit A for all the things not to do when I'm in Vistage. Like, oh, you want to lose a lot of money? Here, let me tell you what I did. Let me take a good idea and just starve it. Let me show you how to drive it into the ground. Honestly, it's so funny. Part of my Vistage experience is I have so much envy. It's like, wow, I wish I'd have been that smart. Or I wish somebody had challenged me on that. I was making a good living. I had a good life, but it was much more of a lifestyle business. And even then I didn't do enough and that sounds pejorative. There's nothing wrong with lifestyle business as long as you know what you're in. You know that it's lifestyle and you invest accordingly, right? And I didn't even make the minimum investments in some ways in that. So yeah, there were a couple opportunities I had to really kind of, I think, do something, and I had people around me who were doing it, and I don't know. Like I was watching a movie, like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, well, look what they're doing over there. I didn't kind of take it back and go, oh, wonder why I can't do that. It's like, oh, good for you. I'm the Russian skating judge. Oh, that's a 3. It's like, why didn't you do it? I don't have an answer for that. It's kind of weird, but yeah, I had moments. Certainly had windows that certainly closed, but I had a good ride. I mean, good living, learned a lot. They were some fairly, at the time, fairly disruptive tools, which I enjoyed. Something that's not vanilla, something that's a little bit, unique and meaningful, right? It's got to be unique and meaningful. Otherwise, it's obtuse. So it's the pressure.
Well, what do you think? Because like you are an incredibly successful Vistage chair, and so like how did you make the decision and say like, oh, this thing Vistage
Yeah.
exists, I'm going to go do it, and then like, what do you think has been kind of key to your own success as a chair?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. It's interesting. I think I was turning 60, right? So I'm almost 8 years a chair. I turned 68 this year. I think I was looking for something to give back. I mean, it's funny. I thought about my life. I'd done all these things, and I'd never coached. Coaching always to me seemed soft. It was squishy. I thought, oh, that what's that? What is that? It didn't seem appealing to me. My wife had done it at Fuqua, the Duke Graduate School of Business. She'd been a career coach, and she'd been a coach at Lee Heck Harrison, so she had experience with it. But I was kind of like antibodies, like, oh, that's not me. But I thought they burned incense, and you sat around and I did. I was really stupid about it, but I wanted to take my experience as a business owner, my corporate experience, my military. I thought that was like the 3 legs of a stool that would make me useful to people who were trying to lead organizations, who were trying to scale businesses. I scaled them just on other people's dimes, and that's different. I get that. You have people in our group who are private equity CEOs or presidents, and they've never been an entrepreneur, but they still have a perspective. And I probably, most of my life until when I turned 40, that was me. I was, a house money. What did I have at risk? I didn't have an SBA loan with my mortgage, home leveraged. I didn't have those kinds of things. Now I did later, but so I think all those things I thought would help me at least have empathy and maybe perspective to be useful to business owners. Certainly, I couldn't tell exit stories. I couldn't bore them with my big exit stories. That was never going to be a problem. So, you know,
Interesting. And then what about like, how long have you been a chair now?
8 years in August. Yeah,
8 years?
yeah, 8 years.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's super impressive. Super impressive. What about, so if that's like the traction um and the scaling, like what about the retention part? Like what are some things that you think about when you're thinking through like how do I keep the members?
Yeah, yeah, it's a great question. It's always a challenge. I mean, some people, there's seasons in people's lives. I came to recognize that. Some, people leave. It's like, 5 years, 6 years. The ones that hurt to me are a year. Early on, I was like, oh my God, what happened? And so part of it to me is on the front end, really being very clear and with a conversation around what if this is 6 months from now and this is a success, why is it a success in your mind? Oh, because I've networked the room and I've got a lot of business going on with my colleagues. You go, okay. I want to know in their mind so I can manage expectations and I can see how they view this, right? This experience. How are you going to measure whether this is worth it or not? And I basically say you should expect an ROI. So I say return. If you're spending 21 or 1,000, whatever it is, you should get 5x of that. And the only way that's going to happen is if you bring your real issues and opportunities into the room. That's the only way you're going to get any chance to get any kind of multiple on that investment. And you're going to point to the year and go, what decisions did you alter? What things did you do differently because of your participation in this group? And you should be able to point to things that say, hey, we shouldn't have to doubt that. Like there's an ROI. It shouldn't be, well, I feel good or this, I made good friends. I mean, that's nice, but you should have an expectation of an ROI, a return. And that's only going to happen if you're very specific about what your biggest issues are and you bring those to the group. You don't try to look good. You come in here and really open up. And so I kind of say that's part of the experience. If you don't want to do that, then this is probably not a group you want to be in. And people that struggle with it are the people that have a hard time opening up. And I've gotten better at seeing who those people are earlier, being wrong early. But I've still made mistakes. Sometimes you do. You have people with imposter syndrome, who are sitting in a room full of entrepreneurs and they're not an entrepreneur and they worry about, well, I don't fit in. These people, I don't have their lived experience. And I don't think that matters. I think in their mind, it matters more to them that they're not an entrepreneur, that they're corporate or private equity or whatever. But they bring a very important perspective. And we try to, value that and reinforce that. But your retention is value. To me, it's about value. I mean, it's about, making this the day they circle, because the learning lab excites them. They know they don't know what they're going to learn. They know they're going to learn something. They may not know what it is. And I think Ann and I try to be flexible with agendas. I used to be very, from 0800 to 0815, we will, engage with each other. From 0815 to 020, we'll have coffee. From 020, I had this whole thing mapped out with 14 backup packets of exercises in case something went wrong. That was like year one. And then you realize, hey, you got to be flexible, man. You got to have, an intention for the day, we call it. But man, we've pivoted a lot. Somebody comes in there with an issue like, hey, time out. This is what we're doing right now. This is why we have Vistage. We're not going to, we'll table that till next month, or let's talk about, no, we're doing that right now. We're going to, unless there's a speaker, then you say, okay, respect their time. But yeah, I think being flexible and really paying attention to people, listening to the conversations. I don't think the Vistage session starts until the members are talking to each other. So our goal is to get members talking to each other as quickly as possible, because that's where the value happens, in my mind, is in the engagement they have with each other and the help they give each other. So
I wonder if the whole rigidness. I did the same thing. So the first company which bankrupted, like I remember I put together our first like offsite meeting with the leadership team, and I had it down to the minute. I don't think I went on to like the ones or twos or threes. So I think it was like 15 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever the case may be. But like you get it. And then like it just created frustration for me, because we would all show up and then like, someone's like, I gotta go to the bathroom. I was like, it's not bathroom break yet. Okay. Like we're not at that point.
right.
Yeah.
I don't have empathy on the agenda yet. Wait, we're not ready for empathy yet. That doesn't happen until 8:30. Can you back that away for a moment? It's like, like, whoa, time out. Don't emote yet. Okay, ready, emote. We're at 8:45. Yeah, I know. It's like, I think it's an insecurity. It's like, you have a sense of control. Like, I got to control the room. And then the more you give that up, the more you realize, hey, I'm not in control. I've got to pay attention to what's on their heart and what's going on here, so that I can direct it, but not force it. It's like, it's their session. It's their session, and they get out of it what they put into it. My job is to facilitate that with my wife, Anna, and, we try to say, hey, they're adults. It's their experience. We give them all the possibilities, but they got to step into it. They got to lean into it and make it happen. We'll help them.
All right, Chris, last two questions here. Number one, you kind of already answered this, but we'll just do like a quick recap on this. What do you look for in new members? And then if someone's listening to this and they're like, oh gosh, I'd love to, explore membership in Chris's group, how can they get a hold of you?
Yeah. So, LinkedIn is a great way to, get a hold of me. I look for people that they want to grow. They're not comfortable status quo, right? You join Vistage to get better, to change. You don't grow there to stay the same, right? I've heard that before, and I agree with that. So people that are really serious about change and are open to that, that's important. They're coachable. It's not a yes/no question. Are you coachable? Oh, yes. Okay, good. I asked that question. You ask them coaching questions, and then you see how they react. Like, oh, do they get like huffy? Like, oh, I'm not going there. Or do they, like I said, when they hang up the phone, you hope they say, wow, those were some questions nobody's asked me. And that was uncomfortable, but you know what? I probably need more of that, right? If I went to Orange Theory the first time and I left there without sweating and I didn't hurt, I'd probably say, yeah, that was interesting, but I don't feel any different. I could barely make it to the parking lot. It's like, it's like they're taking me on a stretcher. Oh, that was exactly what I needed. That was discontinuous. I needed something that rocked my world. That's kind of what you have to be open to. You got to say it. Change. It's going to be uncomfortable. But if you're not changing, you're probably going backwards. Or I don't think you stay the same, either regress or progress. And, I think so. I'm trying to see if the people are up for that, and they give them a little taste of what that might be like. People are going to challenge you. People are going to, in a respectful way, ask you questions that nobody at work's going to ever ask you. They're going to challenge you, and if you feel like that's going to make you better, and you're open to that, and we try to get people to process issue in their first session if possible. There's no, like the Catholic school dance hanging on the wall, waiting for the sister to say, okay, get in the middle. We'll get them out there dancing. It's like, let's go. This is an experience. This is not an intellectual thing. This is experiential. You got to get in the deep end, and that's what you signed up for. And so it's funny. You see people like that. They just want to hang back, like, on the wall. It's like, nope, that's what you're here for. So as much as possible, we try to get them in the middle of, processing an issue fast. Because then they realize it's safe. Like I said things I've never said out loud, right? Those people really kind of, saw me. They understood me. And being seen is very powerful.
I love it, Chris. This was a lot of fun. And I knew it was going to be fun just looking at your background. I was like, oh, we've got the and like, I know Marines. And so this is going to be a great conversation. So one, you did not disappoint, and I appreciate it. This was a lot of fun. And thank you so much for coming on and like sharing your experiences. I think what was really powerful about this one is like the experiences that translated from your leadership. Like, because I think people are like, oh, well, leading people into war is much different than leading businesses. And like my argument for that would be like, it's leading people, like at the end of the day. And there's a lot of similarities. And I think you called those things out. So
no, I mean, leading people into places where it's unnatural to go.
Yeah.
And that's what we do in Vistage, and that's what you do in the Marines. You take them to places their mind's saying, I shouldn't be here. This isn't safe. I don't want to do this. And you still go. You lead them there. And that's what we do as chairs, and that's what you do as a Marine infantry officer. You take people that go, hey, my body's telling me I shouldn't be doing this. Nobody back home would be doing this. What am I doing? And you go, well, that's what we're here for. That's what you signed up for, and we're going to guide you through that.
Love it. Awesome. Thanks again, Chris. I appreciate you taking the time to come on.
Well, thanks, Ryan. I enjoyed it very much.